Hi folks, how you doing? It's James, JT at the Movies. Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to episode 2 of the series that I'm dubbing JT's Film Diary. So if you saw the last video on the channel, you'll see that at the start of the year, maybe towards the end of last year, I reactivated my Letterboxd account. Now, I've never really been too sure what to do with Letterboxd. I've never really sat down and properly had a look at it. But I've started using it to keep a log of what I've been watching, and I found it really useful for that. And slowly but surely, I'm exploring it, starting to connect with other people on there and whatever else, and finding it great. But I really love the feature where I can log the films that I've watched, and I've got a diary of what I've been watching all year. It's a great time capsule for me. And when I realised that I could do this at the beginning of the year, I intended to bring you this monthly series and talk about what I'd watched that month, because I do my monthly pickups where I talk about the actual physical media of it all. But then I don't always talk about watching the film and what I think about it and whatever else. And as I said in the last episode, there's kind of two sides to the hobby. There's the collecting and then there's the watching of the films as well. And that's kind of what I want this series to focus on. Hopefully, as well, the sound quality is going to be the best it's probably been on this channel, because I've bought myself a little microphone kit, as you can see, down here in the movie room. It's in the basement of the house. We spent a lot of money having it converted, and it's a fantastic conversion. You know, it really is my favorite room in the house now. And to make sure that we can keep this room nice and cool, nice and clean, and with it being an old basement, you know, damp and mold and whatever free, there's constantly like an aircon dehumidifier unit that runs in the room, and it has like a low hum in the background that I've certainly noticed in the background of my audio of videos that I've done since moving down here. And I'm sure some of you guys have as well. And it sort of got to the point where I'd filmed some of my last videos, the first entry of this series being one of them, and then listened to them back and thought, I really need to do something about that. So I did a bit of research and I bought this microphone kit that is designed to only capture the voice that's within the proximity of the microphone and filter out the background noise. So it's got the little windshield thing on it as well. But enough about that. You've not come to hear about my new microphone kit. I just thought now's as good a time as any to sort of talk about why I'm using a microphone all of a sudden. Let's talk about what I've watched in February 2025. As always, I'll tell you the date that I watched it, my thoughts on the film, anything else that I want to share, and what I gave it on Letterboxd out of 5, and then obviously what that means my score out of 10 on the channel is. So the 2nd of February, the first film that I watched was one called Night Watch. Now, I came across this one because I was watching a chap who does have a YouTube channel, but he's more prominent over on TikTok, a guy called Chino Collects, somebody that I follow on there. And he was sort of saying that this film was kind of an underrated gem, and I bet a lot of people had it in the collections and didn't realize, you know, or hadn't seen it in years, and that, you know, basically just sort of an appreciation post for this film and to go and watch it if you hadn't seen it or hadn't seen it in the longest time. And he sort of gave a bit of a plot synopsis, and I was fair taken with it. So I thought, hang on, I think I've got that. Came down here, and sure enough, over there in the corner where the end DVDs are, I had it. So we put it on and we watched it. It was good. It was really enjoyable without being fantastic, if that makes sense. It was a good little thriller that kept me gripped from the start. I liked the premise. I liked the fact that they were alluding that there might be a bit of supernatural, or there might be a bit of this, or there might be a bit of that. And you really didn't know who you could trust along the way. There's the central character being played by Ewan McGregor, and he's a student trying to put himself through school, working through a morgue. And then you've got his sort of best mate, who's really a questionable character, and you just don't know where you stand with him, played by Josh Brolin. And then there's the cop who's investigating the crimes in the film, played by Nick Nolte. And again, you just don't know where you stand with him. And there's a whole host of other characters, girlfriends and other friends that we meet along the way, and teachers and security guards. And I think, I could be wrong, but I think it's Brad Dourif, Chucky, that plays one of the doctors in it, and he's, you know, sort of a really sort of vindictive piece of work in it as well. And you don't know who the bad guy's going to be until it's revealed through like the POV of one of the girlfriends, and then the third act takes you on its journey. But it really does keep you guessing and thinking, right, well, hang on, can I trust Josh Brolin? Can I trust the copper? Can I trust Ewan McGregor? Can I trust the doctor? And I liked that. I also found out that it was a remake of a European film from a couple of years earlier with the exact same plot. And Arrow are releasing those as a Blu-ray set later on in July, because the original, I think it might be Norwegian, or somewhere in that sort of region, of Europe anyway, the original film's from. But there was a sequel to that one. The American one didn't get a sequel, but the American one was remade by the same people that made the European one. They wanted to try and bring it to a wider audience, so remade it for the English language. And I think it's one that's kind of faded into obscurity, which is a shame. But I gave it 3 stars out of 5 or a 6 out of 10. I would happily watch this film again. I think when I pick the box set up of the original European releases, I'll probably try and do a bit of a trilogy evening and watch them all in one go. So that was on the 2nd of February, Night Watch. We'll move on now to the next film I watched in the month, which was on the 3rd of February, and that was 2023. Let's double check that then. Last Voyage of the Demeter. So I've been on a bit of a Dracula kick lately. Towards the back end of last year, I revisited Bram Stoker's Dracula, the Gary Oldman one, and absolutely loved it. And me and Laura also around that time watched Renfield, the Nicolas Cage, Nicholas Hoult comedy, and loved how that tied into the original Bela Lugosi Dracula, so I ended up revisiting that and just got this real, I'll say, thirst to make a bit of a Dracula pun, to watch more Dracula movies and consume some Dracula content. So I saw that the Demeter movie was finally been released on physical media over here, picked it up and popped it in, and had the best time with it. I loved the aesthetic. I've always loved that part of the Dracula story and the book as well. And we watched the Dracula reimagining TV series as well, and I enjoyed that episode where it was sat on the boat and the run to from Transylvania to Whitby. And we don't live too far from Whitby and stuff, so I've been and sort of seen those that coast and sat on the bench and seen the sights and done the exhibition and the abbey and stuff. So I absolutely love that. So it was really, really great to watch that. I really liked the depiction of Dracula in this as more of a monster, and less of the he's not fully formed back into the into the count that can integrate into society. And I liked the different twists and turns that it took, compared with the novel. It did a few things, did its own thing, and the ending was a little bit, sort of the book goes left and the story went right. But I liked it, really, really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 out of 5 on Letterboxd, so an 8 out of 10 is what I would give it on the channel. And yeah, absolutely, go and check that out if you haven't seen it. It's readily available for streaming and pretty much has been since it came out. But Dazzler Media popped the Blu-ray out earlier this year. I reckon it's about a tenner now, and it's well worth the price for picking up. So we jump along now to the 6th of February, and very much in the same vein, I watched The Monster Squad from 1987. And yeah, it was just me on that Dracula kick. There's it's not Bela Lugosi, of course, playing him, but it's the interpretation of the Bela Lugosi Dracula and all the rest of the Universal monsters, Frankenstein's monster, and Creature from the Black Lagoon, the Wolfman, and whatever else. And they're transported into 1980s sort of suburban America, and it's kind of like the Goonies going up against all these classic monsters, but with it's rated a 15, so it's got a slightly harder edge than just a kids film. And I really, really enjoyed it. It was the first time I'd seen it. I watched it on Amazon Prime and was so taken with it. I imported the Blu-ray of it from Spain because there's not readily available a Blu-ray of it over here in the UK. And again, so taken with it even further from that had the English cover then printed up at the local print shop to put on the Spanish Blu-ray, so that it actually looks right on the shelf. Just looking over at it there, really, really enjoyed it. I gave it a 3.5, so a 7 out of 10. And yeah, just great. It's still streaming on Amazon to the best of my knowledge. Go give it a watch. It feels like pure nostalgia. It feels like you could watch that, The Goonies, Ferris Bueller, and it fits into that sort of mold of and time of movies. Really, really great stuff. I'm not going to spend too long on these next two because you can actually see a video where you'll see mine and my friends' in-depth thoughts on them because of the films we watched in one of the movie night vlogs. But on the 7th of February, we watched Last Action Hero with Arnie and Lake Placid. Last Action Hero, I gave it 3 stars out of a possible 5 or a 6 out of 10. It's a fun Arnie movie. It turns a lot of sort of tropes and cliches on their head and makes fun of itself. It's self-aware. I think it's a little bit before its time. I think if that film came out now, maybe not now, but maybe sort of 10 years ago, before everything was really sort of oversaturated in this whole sort of multiverse meta, sort of everything's interconnected that we've got going on now. But if it came out 10, 15 years ago, I think it would have been much better received than where it was. But I do think it was ahead of its time. Really enjoyed it. You can see the video to see our thoughts on it. And then Lake Placid gave it a 2.5 or a 5 out of 5. It's it is what it is. It's a cheesy comedic creature feature. The cast is the best thing of it. You know, you Bill Pullman, Oliver Platt, Brendan Gleeson, Bridget Fonda, Betty White's in there. Everybody's in there. It's a real who's who of sort of 80s and 90s treasures. And it's just a shame that the film's not better, really. So I gave that 2.5. Then we jump on now to the 10th of February, and I watched The Cell starring Jennifer Lopez, Vince Vaughn, and I believe it's Vincent D'Onofrio. Somebody will correct me down below if I'm wrong, or if I am wrong, I might even put a title like I like to do. But I decided to watch this one on the back of the Arrow video controversy. So they put out director's cut and all singing, all dancing edition like Arrow like to do. But then it turns out that the disc has sort of slipped through quality control, and one of the cuts of the film doesn't play right, and skips, and frames and scenes repeat themselves and things like that. And so seeing that controversy put the film in the forefront of my mind, because I was seeing people talking about it on here, and in forums on Facebook and Reddit and other places that I like to read and engage about films. So I thought to myself, well, it's high time I give this a watch. So I dusted off my old DVD copy, which is somewhere up there, and I enjoyed it. Was it great? No, but I had fun with it. I enjoyed the premise. It wasn't just your usual sort of 90s, noughties, serial killer thriller where the cops are trying to close in on them. It did its own thing with the entering the people's minds and stuff, and it felt a little bit Lawnmower Man with that sort of aspect of it, and the effects were a little bit cheesy, and there were a couple of moments where that side of things maybe took me out of the film. And I think I probably would have enjoyed it more if that stuff was maybe either done better or played down. But I really liked like the villain's lair and the sort of the race against the clock to save the woman, and the two different angles of Lopez's cop sort of trying to sort of win the killer over and sort of appeal to sort of his human nature, and then Vince Vaughn's character being more the traditional sort of he's the perp, I'm the cop. Let's get the bad guys and save the day sort of thing. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I don't think it's one that I'm necessarily going to rush to go and buy the Blu-ray of when Arrow sort it out. I think it's one of them where I'll happily stick with the DVD, or if it was on telly, I'd watch it. But it's not one that I'm thinking, oh, I must have that in 4K and a massive box set and everything from my collection. It's just not needed for me. I gave it a 3 out of 5 or a 6 out of 10. So the next one then, early doors in this series, but this is a contender for my film of the year. I took my granddad on the 12th of February to the cinemas, and we went to see A Complete Unknown, the Bob Dylan biopic made by James Mangold. Tells the story of the early years of Bob Dylan's career, from him being discovered by Woody Guthrie and I forget the other guy's name, Pete Seeger. There we go. To his rise to fame, and then his sort of controversial appearance, shall we say, at the Newport Folk Festival, where he played an electric guitar and played with a backup band, and sort of stepped away from his acoustic guitar, harmonica, traditional Bob Dylan sort of sound and aesthetic and everything. But it tells you about him writing all his famous tunes, and it talks about the highs and the lows of becoming an overnight sensation in 60s New York. Talks about his quite toxic relationship that he had with Joan Baez, and while they changed the identity of the name of his first wife in this, I can't remember what they call her in the film, what she's even called in real life, but they sort of changed that up. But it really sort of shows you how he's struggling, and how he can be quite a challenging character to be around, but then how some of the people that he surrounds himself with, and everybody sort of got their own demons, and there's a lot of things in this film that I feel like, had the people sat down and just communicated with each other, none of it would have needed to happen. But it was that's not a complaint. It's brilliant. It's masterfully shot, masterfully made. Timothy Chalamet just disappears in the role of Bob Dylan. You don't even see Chalamet. It's Bob Dylan, and the fact that this film was in production for 5 years, or pre-production for 5 years, meant that Chalamet could go away and learn the guitar, learn the harmonica, learn to imitate Dylan, and he even had sessions where he'd go and see Dylan, and Dylan would give him pointers and things. I just think it's the amount of work and effort that went into the film really shows on the screen. And my granddad's not the biggest Bob Dylan fan. He grew up around the music. He was in his teens and his 20s in the 60s. So this was very much his era. But he was never the biggest fan of Bob Dylan. But he came out of that film going, yeah, that was a good film. That was a fantastic film. And I don't often say I will definitively buy the 4K of something. I get the Blu-ray or I get the DVD, but I'm like, that needs to be in the 4K. I need to see that in the best quality. I need to hear that in the best quality, and it's just bloody tremendous. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 or a 9 out of 10. So then, from one end of the scale to completely the other, on the 13th, I must have had a day off work because I managed to get through 4 films and had myself a little bit of a movie day. So the first one that I watched was again inspired by TikTok. I was seeing clips of it, and I realised that I'd never actually seen this film, but it was regarded as one of the worst films of all time, and I kind of felt like I needed to experience it myself so that I could, you know, sort of join the conversation sort of legitimately and be able to sort of go, yeah, that is a terrible film or whatever. And it's Dragon Ball Evolution. So I'm not a fan of the anime. I have seen a handful of episodes. I tried watching it when I was younger, when friends were getting into it, namely Lyndon and James when we were in primary school and early years of secondary school, and I tried to sort of keep up with the Joneses, as it were, and I just couldn't get into it at all. And so I left that there. And so then when Evolution came out the first time round, had no interest in seeing it. But anyway, finally watched it, and I think the fact that I know little to nothing of the actual world and the lore and whatever allowed me to enjoy this probably a lot more than I should have done. And I'll just, before we go any further, so you don't switch off, I gave it 2.5 out of 5 or a 5 out of 10. Is it a bad movie? Yeah. Is the CG awful? Yes, it is. Is the acting terrible? Atrocious, excuse my language. But there was just something about it that I enjoyed the ride. I just let it wash over me. I laughed when it was supposed to be funny. I laughed when it was unintentionally funny. I got to the end of it and I didn't feel like I'd wasted my time completely, if that makes sense. And I had no desire to, I know they've never made a sequel and probably never will, but I've no desire to see a sequel. I've no desire to watch it again. But I can say I've seen it and I didn't hate it. It was what it was. I think that's about as kind as I can probably be to that film. And then in the afternoon, I had a bit of a James Bond double bill, but not in the way that you might expect. I finally earlier this year picked up the DVD of the George Lazenby docudrama Becoming Bond, and it talks about George Lazenby's life in the run up to becoming James Bond, and then gives you a little bit of the what he did afterwards. But starts from his early life in Australia to the famous sort of going and getting Sean Connery's leftover suit from the tailor on Savile Row and conning his way into Peter Hunt and Broccoli and Saltzman's offices at Eon Productions, and blagging the role of James Bond in possibly what is one of the greatest blags and almost cons of cinematic history, and then the disaster of the production that was on Her Majesty's Secret Service, at how they managed to get a fantastic film out of it is beyond me. It really is, because the stories that Lazenby tells about how he would sabotage himself and sabotage the other people around him, and he would sort of without wanting to be too crass, he'd think about sort of getting away with a lady before he would thinking about putting his job first or his finances, and the things that this guy did just to sleep with a lady. I found it a really really fascinating watch, and it didn't necessarily paint him in the best of lights most of the times, but it was really honest and warts and all. And there were moments towards the end of it where his choices came back to bite him in the ass, and you know, you, even though it was all self-inflicted, you kind of it was made well enough that you felt like, yeah, I kind of feel sorry for him that he doesn't get the girl at the end, and he obviously blunders the Bond career and never really managed to take off as an actor because of it. And yeah, really, really interesting. And for anybody who's a fan of James Bond, I think it's definitely a tidbit that you should consume. I think you'd really like it. And I gave it 4 stars out of 5 or an 8 out of 10. I think it was really, really well done. And then, very much in that same vein, as I say, we had a bit of a Bond afternoon. I revisited The Sound of 007 on Amazon Prime, and that was the 60th anniversary documentary about the sound of 007, the Monty Norman, John Barry music. I gave it 3.5 out of a possible 5 or a 7 out of 10. I enjoyed it, and the information that was there was plentiful, but they really nitpicked the parts of Bond history that they wanted to talk about. They talked about Monty Norman coming up with the theme and John Barry orchestrating it, and then how John Barry kind of became the face of it and the template and the one to emulate. But then they really didn't talk about, any of the stuff that like Marvin Hamlish did or Bill Conti or Michael Kamen. And they kind of brush over the David Arnold stuff as well. And, he is really, I know he doesn't do it anymore, and hopefully the new guys bring him back, but he's the rightful successor in my mind to John Barry is David Arnold. And then they just sort of, rush into the Hans Zimmer stuff, and then the second half of the documentary is all about the Billie Eilish and Phineas and Johnny Marr and Hans Zimmer collaboration for No Time to Die. And I understand why, because that was the film that was the one that was out at the time and the one that they were plugging, and I get why, but I just think it could have been such a better documentary if it was either more evenly spaced out between all the people that have had a go at it and was more of a complete retrospective, or maybe it was a series and they did, an episode on the Connery years, an episode on the Moore years, and you get the drift. But yeah, 7 out of 10 or a 3.5 out of 5. I enjoyed it. Obviously, I came back to it. It was just I was in the mood for Bond, and I knew I didn't want to put one of the films on, but wanted to be in that world. So yeah. And then also the last film on the 13th, I watched From Hell, the Johnny Depp film from 2001, which is, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, an adaptation of a graphic novel by Alan Moore and co. And it's about a detective trying to solve the Jack the Ripper murders. I've always really liked this film. My old mate Ross, who I went to school with Lyndon and me. And when we were kids, we were thick as thieves. He lives in Birmingham now with his lovely family, and we text from time to time and whatever else. But that's a whole other aside. But anyway, we watched this film quite regularly growing up, movie nights, and I've talked about the common room in the sixth form block at school where we had the TV and the movies and whatever else. And loads of times I've watched this and fancied revisiting it. I remember it was on Disney Plus, and I had a great time with it. There's so many great people in this. Johnny Depp, Robbie Coltrane, Heather Graham, Ian Holmes in there. And I'm not even scratching the surface. It's a real ensemble cast. I love anything sort of set in Victorian, Edwardian London or England. I just really love that sort of aesthetic and that sort of time in our history. I find it really, really fascinating. And I, obviously have quite an intrigue, as I'm sure a lot of Brits that like crime and thriller and things do in the Jack the Ripper mysteries. And it's always interesting to see another take on it, another you know idea as to what might have happened, or a bit of creative license on it or whatever. And I suppose it's far enough in the past now that it's one of those things that is open to creative license without it sort of been a sore spot for most of the British public. But yeah, I gave it 3 out of 5 or a 6 out of 10 and very much enjoyed it. The next one that I watched was on the 16th. Me, Laura, and my cousin Charlotte all went to the cinema to see Captain America Brave New World. I'll be honest, the reason I went to the cinema to see this one is because Harrison Ford was in it as one of the villains. It's not often that you see Ford in a villainous role. I think he's only done it, to my knowledge, once before. And I won't say what the film is because I spoiled it for somebody once, and I'll never live that down. But yeah, I enjoyed it. It were all right. It's it's suffering from, and I can't quite describe it succinctly, so I'm not going to try. But I think you'll all know what I mean when I say it's suffering from whatever the MCU is suffering from at the moment, and I think it's just fatigue. I really think that it should have had a break after Endgame, and they should have had a few years off, and you know rested for the pandemic or whatever, and maybe be coming back to it last year and now sort of time. and I think people would have been energized again. There is a film that I'll talk about in a later series of, a video in this series rather, from the MCU that I did right enjoy this year and felt more like it was cut from the cloth of the original stuff. But yeah, I enjoyed it without loving it. It were all right. And that's Captain America: Brave New World. I gave it, if I didn't already say, 2.5 out of 5 stars, or a 5 out of 10. I then watched on the 22nd a documentary on Netflix. One of my favourite sort of American crime sort of cold case killer stories is the Zodiac. I was introduced to it with the David Fincher film, and I've watched countless documentaries, read the Robert Graysmith book, and really, really just enjoy sort of knowing about that case. Terrible what happened to those people, but an absolutely fascinating sort of event in recent history. So I watched the new documentary. This is the Zodiac speaking, and this is the story of some now middle-aged adults that were kids at the time whose mother was involved with one of the prime suspects, Arthur Lee Allen, and it follows their journey of piecing together that they believe he was the Zodiac killer, and they actually believe that they were in his car at the time when he sort of parked up and said, "I'm just going to go and have a wee behind those trees, or I'm just going to go stretch my legs. You guys just hold down the fort in the car." When he might have been actually killing and attacking that young couple at the lake, or when he went and committed the murders in the car that's brought to life at the beginning of the Fincher film. And there were so many others, and then there were letters and things sent back and forth, and so many coincidences. And the family that had done this documentary had actually been sort of at odds with each other and in turmoil for years, because there were a couple of siblings that firmly believed, hang on, this is the Zodiac, and we're trying to prove it. And then there was the others that were going, no, it couldn't be. It's Uncle Lee, or whatever they used to call him. And yeah, it was a really fascinating and chilling watch. And it's one of those where it still remains a cold case, and unfortunately, it doesn't definitively prove anything, but it certainly adds more irons to the fire, as it were, that Arthur Lee Allen might well have been the Zodiac killer. And if it's something that you're interested in, then I would definitely say to revisit it. So I told a little white lie earlier. It turns out I did actually revisit this film in the same month that I was on my little Dracula binge. I rewatched Renfield. I bloody loved it. I gave it 3 out of 5, 6 out of 10, because I don't necessarily think it did anything new in terms of a horror comedy. And I don't think that any of the performances in it were mind blowingly good. And, you know, it did exactly what it needed to do. It made you laugh. It was gory. The actors were funny and well cast. Nicolas Cage is inspired as Dracula. I think that they could really do something with that again in the future. I almost felt like I was watching something in like the Kick-Ass universe, or a superhero-esque type film. It was that sort of thing. I really liked Nicholas Hoult as well, playing off Aquafina as the two sort of the Renfield and the cop, and then the villains from the mob and stuff were great. And it was just these villains thinking they're the absolute dogs, and then Dracula shows up and they soon realize where they are in the pecking order, and it just hilarity ensues. And Renfield trying to make a life for himself and decorating this apartment, and it just yeah, really, really, really enjoyed it. And it's definitely one that I would come back to. So as I say, I gave it a 3 out of 5, or a 6 out of 10. Um, and I think that's a perfectly fair review. And sorry, I didn't mention, but that was on the 23rd of February. Also on the 23rd of February, me and Laura watched Starship Troopers. So here's where I maybe get my movie card revoked again. This was my first viewing of Starship Troopers. I absolutely love Paul Verhoeven's filmmaking. Obviously, love Total Recall, Basic Instinct. So many of those films that he's made or been involved with in the late 80s and 90s. They're just classics, and I can't believe that I hadn't seen this film, but I hadn't seen it, and it was one of them where it caught my eye on the shelf, and so I was like, "Yeah, this is what we're watching tonight." It was great fun. It was so cheesy. It was just action packed. Loved all the characters. Hated all the villains. You cheered for the right people. You were sad when the people died that died. You were happy when the heroes triumphed at this point, and when the main characters were separated, you felt it when they were reunited. I really enjoyed it. Is it a world-changing movie? Is it going to absolutely set the world on fire? No, of course it's not. But it's a sci-fi classic, and I can absolutely, finally add to that conversation that I agree it is a sci-fi classic, and a modern sci-fi classic, if you like. So I gave it 3.5 or a 7 out of 10. Now, this next film, I'm going to do another video on, but I gave it the full 5 out of 5, and it's a film from 2007 called The Man from Earth. It's spectacular. It is beyond spectacular, in my opinion. Uh, and the reason I gave it the 5 for 5, or a full 10 out of 10, is the execution of the acting and the story itself. Uh, it's very much a subjective review, and I want to talk about it more in another video that I've been planning for quite some time. So I don't want to get too much into it. What I will say is that while it's not the easiest to track down on DVD, it took me a while to find it. Again, TikTok was showing me clips, and I'm like, I've got to see this film, and managed to track it down. It is actually readily available to watch on YouTube. It doesn't seem to be one that people are too bothered about the copyright for. It's got Tony Todd in it, and that's about the biggest name in it. He plays one of the side characters, and it's basically a bottle movie. It is a group of college professors talking to one of their colleagues who's retiring and moving on to go and live in a new town in his retirement, and they can't fathom why he's retiring so young and why he's leaving a tenured career behind, and his girlfriend and his colleagues and his students, and they just can't. And he tells them the story, and finally sort of confides in them as to why he's moving on, and the emotions that the story takes you on, and the shock and the disbelief and whatever else. The one thing I will say that maybe went against the film was the ending was a little bit sort of, how do I put this? It was a great ending, and it was exactly the ending that this type of film needed, but it was a little bit on the nose, a little bit cheesy. Um, and some of you might say it wasn't earned, but I really enjoyed it, and it didn't detract from the film. I literally sat in this chair where I'm sat now, and the credits rolled, and Alexander was asleep on me, and I was watching it, and I was like, wow. And yeah, I just absolutely loved it. You'll see that I talked about it in the pickup video where I bought it, and I know that inspired a few people to go and watch it and seek it out. But I really really recommend it. But wait for the video that I'm going to do where I talk about it more in depth, because I think you'll enjoy that. And then we move on now to the 24th of February, and I watched Paddington in Peru, the long-awaited threequel. It were great. It weren't as good as the first two, but I think it's really hard to have lightning be captured in a bottle once, let alone twice. And by the time you get to the third one, you really are lucky if you just make a passable film. But I mean, look at how many trilogies have got perfectly great third entries. Your Star Wars, The Dark Knight, Back to the Future. But most trilogies have at least one entry that the fans consider to be, the weaker of. And I would say that this is that one. But that being said, again, it's like sort of comparing Back to the Future 3 to Back to the Future. It's still two bloody fantastic films, still, two absolute top tier films, but it's like one's here and then one's just there. But yeah, Paddington goes back to Peru in search of Aunt Lucy. She's been staying at a nursing home for bears, led by some nuns, and there's something a bit fishy going on. And so Paddington and the Brown family all go on an adventure. And I don't know whether I mean, the first two made me cry anyway. I saw the first one in the cinemas, and it was one of the. She was still well and was still probably alive for about 10 years to come at that point. But it was one of the last times we ever took my grandma to the cinema, and she loved it. And I remember sitting and bloody bawling my eyes out with my sister and my dad and my grandma, and watching Paddington and then we watched Paddington 2 when it came out on DVD. And again, that one absolutely broke me. And then the end of this one, and I don't know whether it's, like I said, just because I've become a dad in the last 12 months, and my emotions have very much changed and evolved, but it broke me. I'm getting welled up now thinking about it, but where he asks to stay with the family, um, and go home with the Browns sort of thing, I was like, oh, ooh, Lord above. So yeah, I gave that a 4.5 out of a possible 5 or a 9 out of 10. I think the first two are 10 out of 10s. That they're practically flawless. Well, we had a little bit of a jump cut there, folks, because an alarm on my phone decided to go off. Oh well. So just to wrap that up, Paddington 3, absolutely great, but just not quite as good as the first two. Gave it a 9 out of 10. And then the very last film to talk about was watched on the 27th of February, and we revisited Shrek 2. Now, we decided that we were going to have a pizza. I remember this night because it was a really special night. We decided we were going to order a pizza for tea because we'd had one of those days where work and, just life had been challenging, and we'd fed baby and he was playing. So we had a little pizza picnic on the living room floor. Alex played with his toys, and we let him have a couple of chips and whatever else and stuff. And we put Shrek on. Obviously, he loves his cartoons with bright colours. He hadn't got a clue at 1 year old what's going on, but he was really engrossed in the colours and the vibrant sort of images on screen. And obviously, it's the best Shrek film, and I won't hear otherwise. It is the best Shrek film. And here's a controversial hot take for you from me, and this might lose me a few subscribers. Please don't go. I think it's the only good Shrek film. I think the other ones are enjoyable, but I don't think that they're all that. I think that this one is the only one that can truly be said is a good film. But boy, it doesn't half make up for the other ones, in my opinion. I adore the film. What can I say about Shrek 2 that probably hasn't already been said by every other millennial that reviews films on this app? It takes everything that worked about the original, in my opinion, massively improves on it. The villains are great. You love to hate them. You want the heroes to succeed. The addition of Puss in Boots, played wonderfully by Antonio Banderas, is a superb addition. The musical numbers really work. Put it in C minor, and the holding out for a hero stuff is still memed and referenced and quoted and sampled and whatever else, 20 years on from the film coming out. um, the franchise endures to this day. They're making another sequel next year, aren't they? Or later this year it comes out, and there's been the spin-offs of the Puss in Boots and whatever else. It is just an absolutely solid film. So definitely enjoyed revisiting that one, and it was great to see Alexander so sort of engaged with it, and it's going to be one that I hope I can sort of bring him up on when he starts to really appreciate films and stories and that sort of thing. And if I hadn't already mentioned it, I gave it a 4 stars out of 5 or an 8 out of 10. And with that, that is February's film diary all wrapped up. So it looks like these videos are going to come in at about the half-hour mark, then, with how much I liked Chelt. Thank you so much as well to everybody who engaged in the first one. I probably should have said this at the beginning of the video, but it was really great to get some feedback, in particular from Chris, about what you'd like to see. As I said in the last one, I want to make this series. It's something that I'm passionate about bringing to the channel, but I want it to be something that you guys are going to get the content that you want out of me from as well. So I think it's really good to have that bit of a two-way dialogue about helping me shape it. And Chris in particular gave me some really good feedback that I'm going to try and implement in this vlog. So you'll have to let me know if it's working for you, and when we do March's vlog in about a week's time, whether or not the content's sort of working and is it evolving in the right space. If you are new to the channel, hello, nice to meet you. I'm currently on the road to 1,000 subscribers. It really would mean the world to me if you're not already subscribed, if you could just hit that little button and get me over the finishing line. I'm currently in the 950s, so it really would mean the world if you could help me get there. And of course, helps the channel to grow, as I say, but it means I get to know you over future videos as well, and engage with you in the comments and all that sort of stuff. Mention in the comments, of course. Leave me your thoughts down below on anything that I've talked about today. Anything that you want to say about the movies that we've talked about today, or any recommendations you might have, or your opinions on them. I love reading them all. I am very, very busy, but I do try my best to engage with every single one of them. I definitely read them all, and will always put the little heart react and leave a comment in response where I can. If you've enjoyed the video as well, leave it that all important thumbs up. lets YouTube and lets me know to keep making these sort of videos for you. And above all else, folks, take care of yourselves, and I will see you again really soon for my next video. But bye for now.